Welcome to Lesson 11, the one where we finally tell the truth. After 10 lessons of Linux power, here's the honest counterweight. Linux isn't always the right answer. macOS owns content creation and dev laptops, Windows owns gaming and AD integrated enterprise, and Linux still loses on the non-technical desktop. Junior engineers pick a tribe, senior engineers pick the tool. By the end of this lesson, you won't win OS arguments. You'll stop having them. Before we touch weakness, let's set the baseline honestly. Linux owns 4 categories outright, and these aren't up for debate. Servers and cloud at roughly 95%, embedded and Android across 3 billion plus devices, scientific computing and HPC at a clean 100% of the top 500, and the entire DevOps toolchain, Docker, Kubernetes, Terraform, all of it, built for Linux first. Everything we discuss from here lives outside this list. Inside it, there's no argument to have. Now here's the honest matrix. 8 use cases, 3 operating systems, 1 winner per row. Linux takes servers and privacy outright. macOS wins developer laptops, creative work, and non-technical users. Windows owns gaming, enterprise desktop, and specialized commercial software like CAD and Bloomberg. Notice nobody sweeps the board. A junior picks an OS and defends it everywhere. A senior reads this table and picks per row. That's the entire lesson compressed into one grid. Let's zoom in on the macOS column because this is where Linux advocates get the most defensive and the least honest. 3 jobs where Mac genuinely wins. Content creation, where the entire Adobe and Final Cut supply chain assumes Mac or Windows. Developer laptops, where you get real Unix without spending weekends fighting high DPI and sleep states. And hardware integration, where Apple controlling silicon, firmware, and OS produces an 18-hour battery you simply cannot replicate on a ThinkPad. Roughly 70% of senior engineers carry a Mac. That's not a marketing win. That's a verdict. Same honesty applies to Windows. Gaming is the obvious one. 96% of the market, native DirectX, anti-cheat that simply refuses Proton. If competitive multiplayer matters to you, Windows is the rational choice, full stop. Then there's enterprise desktop, Active Directory, Group Policy, Intune, M365. All designed Windows first, and if you're running 10,000 compliant endpoints, Linux fights you at every turn. And finally, specialized commercial software. AutoCAD, SolidWorks, Bloomberg, Pro Audio with vendor drivers. Linux has an alternative, but the industry doesn't accept it. That's roughly 15% of legitimate use cases where Windows wins on merit. Now let's turn the mirror on Linux itself. 3 weak spots the community tends to wave away. First, non-technical end users. Your parents, your spouse, anyone who just wants the computer to work. Linux still demands pseudo-literacy, package manager basics, the occasional terminal dive when an update breaks Wi-Fi. Don't be the friend who installed Ubuntu on grandma's laptop. Second, niche commercial software with no native port. Adobe, AutoCAD, SolidWorks, Bloomberg. Just use GIMP isn't an answer when the client sends you a .psd. And third, hardware OS polish. macOS gets 15 plus hours of battery on the same chassis where Linux gets 6 to 10. Sleep is flaky, fingerprint readers are hit or miss. Webcams look worse because the ISP processing lives in proprietary drivers. Engineers tune TLP and move on. Non-engineers shouldn't have to. So here's the framework that ends most of these arguments. 5 questions, top to bottom, and the first yes decides for you. Is it a server? Linux done. Do you need Adobe or Final Cut natively? macOS or Windows? Competitive multiplayer with anti-cheat? Windows. Locked into an AD and M365 shop? Windows. Stop fighting your IT team. They're right. Non-technical user? macOS or Windows? Everything else, Linux is genuinely on the table. Notice what's missing, because it's free. That's a junior take. Match the tool to the job. And that framework only works if you've dropped the tribalism, which is really what this whole lesson is about. 3 principles. 1. The OS is infrastructure, not identity. Senior engineers run Linux servers, develop on a Mac, game on Windows, and feel nothing about it. 2. Compatibility isn't a debate. If the job needs Adobe, Bloomberg, or AutoCAD, Linux is off the table. And 3. Time costs are real. Fighting Wi-Fi and suspend bugs every month is a tax non-pro users shouldn't pay just so you can feel right. So here's the cheat sheet. 12 real scenarios, 12 honest verdicts. Back-end dev on AWS, Mac laptop, Linux servers. Music producer with thousands sunk into plugins, macOS, because that's where Logic and the plugin ecosystem live. Gaming primary, Windows, period. Yes, Proton is great. No, it's not the whole library. Corporate worker on M365 and Teams, stop fighting IT, run Windows. And notice the one I want you to sit with. Grandma gets macOS or Chrome OS, not Linux. Loving Linux doesn't mean inflicting it on people who just want to read email. Theory only gets you so far. These 3 drills are where the framework actually sticks. First, audit your own machines and be honest about which choices are work-driven and which are just tribe. Second, run 3 real people through the 5-question framework: your non-technical relative, a creative friend, an office worker, and watch how rarely Linux is the right answer. Third, and this is the hard one, pick the OS you've been arguing against for years and write down 5 things it genuinely does better. That last drill is uncomfortable, which is exactly why it works. Here are the 5 tribal mistakes that quietly mark an engineer as junior. Recommending Linux to your non-technical aunt. She'll hate it, switch back, and blame you. Demanding Linux at an Active Directory shop. You'll fight every tool while WSL2 would have done the job. Telling video editors to just use DaVinci. Ignoring that their clients send Premiere files. Calling Macs overpriced while underweighting the 30 hours a year you lose to driver and sleep issues. And the big one, putting Linux user in your bio. Your OS isn't your identity. Senior engineers use whatever gets the job done. So here's where we land. Lesson 11 is done, and with it, the tribalism. You can now say out loud that macOS wins for some workflows, Windows wins for others, and Linux genuinely loses in places, without flinching. That's not weakness, that's judgment. Next up is Lesson 12, the capstone. What you can actually build from here, the 5-year roadmap, and where to push next. Containers, networks, security. The series ends there. See you in graduation.